Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
So again, I want to thank you all for joining our session today, and I'm excited to introduce you to today's presenters. Our first presenter, Dr. Cheryl Jackson, is the Organizational Design and Change Practice Lead at GP Strategies. She is an industrial organizational psychologist with 15 years of experience designing and implementing talent management solutions across a variety of industries, specializing in job design, assessment, and engagement. Welcome, Cheryl. And we have Bill Loudon. He's the Director of Business Consulting, has over 20 years of experience delivering solutions for Fortune 500 companies. He specializes in defining and executing initiatives, programs, and projects that enable companies to achieve their strategic goals and objectives, specifically focused on increasing productivity. Again, we have a really great session planned for today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our presenters.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So just a quick overview of our agenda for the day. First, we're going to start off with project management and change management as separate practices. We're going to talk a little bit about those challenges. And then we want to talk about project management and change management together and the benefits of bringing those together. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about those in action and what that would look like in action. And we'll hopefully have some good chat dialogue as we go along the way. So how do organizations view project or program management and change management? What we normally see is PMs spend the bulk of their time up front doing a heavy lift on building a solution, on designing and developing a solution. And then once that solution is getting rather mature, they say, okay, change management, we're ready to bring it to the organization for adoption. And then CM focuses on the adoption of the new solution and all the people and bringing them all on board with this new solution. And there's challenges that come with that. And a lot of the big challenges that we see, right, is that they're separate. We're going to talk about how they could become together. And we also want to make sure that we just don't see them as separate. But this causes challenges for us. And oftentimes organizations miss the benefits of bringing them together. Forgive me. So as we go through this, right, we want to make sure that we see these as a combined effort as we go forward. So we don't want to see CM just as the implementation piece, which is what we see a lot. So, and then I think we have a poll coming up after this. I'm not sure. Here we go. Set up that piece of it. So we have a poll question, and as that's going on, welcome, there's the poll. Just curious where everyone is that accurate for you? How is it working in your organization? Do PM and CM work together seamlessly and very effectively, and they're always together? They operate well together, but they are separate, or they don't function together at all, and it's really a handoff or a throw over the fence. And just again, curious on how things are happening out there in your world as we go into this. So it looks like we're getting some results as they come in here. So don't have much of a PM or a CM practice. Okay, seeing that. Nice, both operate well, but they don't really operate together. Okay, love to talk to that. Got it, one function is working well, but not both. Okay, nice. Okay.
Would you like me to end the poll?
I think so. I think we've got some good information there. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so when I look at this, I see that we do have a little bit around they're working together well. So as we go through, I would love to hear how it's working for you, how you make that work. Anything that you can add to this conversation would be helpful. Anything that we could talk about or that you could share with your peers. As we also see that both operate well, but they really don't operate well together. And we see that for a number of reasons. They're considered completely different functions with completely different objectives. Oftentimes, they may be totally different teams, and they're not used to working together. We have our own objectives. Why would we want to be slowed down by trying to make an alignment when we don't necessarily see the value in that, or it doesn't go toward our goals and objectives necessarily, because we're not seeing it as a cohesive as a cohesive effort to make those quality adoptable solutions. So it looks like we're a little bit across the board, one working well, but not both. And then I would say a majority here don't have much of a PM or CM practice at all. So we've probably got bits and pieces throughout the organization. And I would say that is potentially a good place to be, because you don't have a lot of habits to break, and you can start to integrate those slowly, which we'll talk about throughout. So really nice results here. Anything you wanted to add to that, Bill?
Move forward.
All right. And so when we look at this, I kind of touched on why do we not see these operating together very often? And as I said, we may see totally different functions and they have different goals. But what happens, why this is a problem, say it's been working well for me in the past, why is this a problem now? Why are you even raising that? And that's because when we have these two different functions, two different sets of goals, we see this disconnect between the solution and the adoption of the solution. And both of those are critical for overall success of this effort. We think about, let's get a great solution and someone else will worry about the adoption, or the adoption will happen naturally because this is such a great effort. But we have a disconnect, and we don't ultimately get to that ideal delivery. And we've learned time and time again that a huge percentage of change efforts fail because we don't have both of these aspects in place. But when they're operating together, we have this solution with adoption at the center of development. We're already thinking ahead about how is the organization going to respond to this? How are we going to create something that they can grab hold of and actually become part of their everyday language if they're new, get those new behaviors embedded. So I'll run through these really quickly. When they're separated, design doesn't necessarily consider those resistance factors. It's not typically something that they're thinking about when they're like, does it meet the specifications? Does it meet the requirements? Can we get it done on time and on budget? They're not really worried about those resistance factors that are going to come later. They're worried about meeting their goals immediately. But when we put them together and we make those goals joint, we see that those friction points are identified early. We say, God, this is going to be a problem. Let's build that into the solution, or at least start thinking about it early. We can identify, remove, and address those friction points in the design. And then we see potential misalignment around the intent, purpose, and goal of the effort, which can create those delays. We have a goal, you have a goal. What about putting those together and aligning stakeholders early, making sure that they're anchored on that common intent and purpose? So as we're developing it, as we're talking about it, it is one cohesive set of messaging, which leads to the next point here. Often we see disjointed communication plans, and there's this uncohesive lack of cohesion around messaging, because we're talking very technically, and then we're talking about change and kind of that softer, squishy stuff about how it's going to impact you and why we're doing this. Those messagings really need to be together, and we can have streamlined communications. They're not getting bombarded with messaging about the technical side and then the adoption side, and they're like, is this even one project? I'm confused at what we're talking about. And I don't know about you, but I've been in many organizations where that has been the case. And I didn't even realize that they were connected, because they were preparing me for something that hadn't come out yet. And then the messaging just didn't connect. And I'm like, what happened to that project they were preparing me for? Well, this is it. But I didn't make that connection. So it really didn't have the adoption power that it could have. You may have experienced this if you're a change practitioner. Change is often pushed to the back burner, and it really doesn't leave us enough time for adequate readiness of the organization. It's like, okay, here you go. Boom. Well, I've got people to upskill. I've got behaviors to start changing. We need to start embedding that messaging early so they know why we're doing it before we're telling them to do it. And when we do that together, we can begin early, identify what's going to happen, and give us sufficient time to make those preparations for the organization. And then one that you're probably more familiar with too, if you've worked in any of these spaces, the clunky handoff. All right, we have this project, it's time for implementation. I've got questions. Can I circle back to the group? We're on to something else. Who was part of it? Well, why did you do it this way? And we've got a bit of a breakdown here. But when they're together, we have that cohesive, thoughtful plan that really flows smoothly from design through adoption. And so those integration points are already made. We don't have a handoff point where we need a long communication time to understand why we did what we did. They're part of the team. It might even be the same person or same group of people that are making these changes throughout. They're already thinking ahead of that. Okay. So let's take another poll here. As you're looking at these different elements that I talked about, which ones really resonate with you? And you can click more than one, click multiple here. But are they the resistance factors and friction points that are not being considered? And like, man, I've got a lot to deal with when I get this handoff. Or misalignment from leadership around communication, where leaders are speaking different languages. I don't see any responses coming in yet. So, oh, there we go. Jumped up really fast. Maybe disjointed communication that employees are receiving. Have you ever been on the receiving end of that? And like, this is a total mess. Have you experienced clunky handoffs or change management efforts that end up getting pushed back? Whoops, we don't have any more time or any more budget. We just have to implement, and you're down to a communication plan, which is often the case with with change management. We think, get the communication ready, let them know it's happening, make sure that everyone is at least informed. And like, it's about more than communication. Looks like we're still ticking in. I think we're slowing down now, Kim, so I think we can go ahead and end that poll and publish it. And it looks like we've got quite a few responses across the board. It looks like as an organization, you've experienced this, been on the receiving end, or have experienced it as an employee. So maybe you're familiar with some of these struggles. All right. And what we want to see to begin to avoid some of these challenges, we don't need any more problems, right? We've got plenty of problems. How about we start doing these more cohesively? This is what we want to see. We don't want to see those, is that bimodal graph where we've got two sections running separately. We want them running together. And in fact, they start to mesh. And if we could do color changing, that would be ideal to show that, hey, these need to be one plan. We need to have cohesion across where we're all going toward the same goal. And ultimately, where project management is creating this quality solution, and change management, quality adoption, getting the organization ready, it's really about creating a quality adoptable solution. And that is our joint plan together. Anything else you want to add to this one, Bill, before I move it to the next one?
No, let's talk project management for a moment.
Right.
We'll dig into a little bit about how they work together towards the end and what that looks like. So again, let's just anchor on what is program or project management. And it's really about building quality adoptable solutions. As Cheryl said, that's our intent, is adoptable solutions. And we want to make sure we enable businesses to evolve and generate positive business outcomes, right? So there's a vision, we have a set of vision and a direction that everyone aligns to. That can be done in unison with change. That's a common effort. The team, all the stakeholders, the people at the end who are going to be impacted by this, that's all part of what we need to be thinking about and talking about. And then we have a standard structure for how we execute program and project management. We have fundamentals that focus on, schedule, cost, stakeholder management, communication, risk, quality, all those fun things that go in there. But they all come together for us to be successful. And so we have this vision that allows people to anchor to that vision. It's a common vision. Everyone's seeing it. You anchor the leaders to it. We help them define that. And then as well as, right, and then we've got to get the people on board, and we have to have a structure that enables them for success. And so we do that throughout the entire life cycle of an effort. So that's project or program management in a nutshell, right?
Yeah, so change management here, we're looking at the processes to get the individuals to do things differently, to think differently, and ultimately incorporate the changes or the solution that is created through the project effort. And we identify these 4 critical components of change. You've got to have the advocacy, really getting those leaders prepared with the tools and the techniques to support this effort through adoption, not just during the development of the solution, providing their input, saying why we need this, but also throughout adoption, making sure they know that they're going to have to be on board to communicate this and reinforce it with their teams. The individuality of change, although we may be adopting this, creating a solution for the organization, an organization is made up of individuals, right? If those individuals don't understand what they're doing and what they need to change and get upskilled themselves, the organization will never be able to move forward. So while project management may be focused on preparing this solution for the organization, we've got to be working on the organization getting ready for that solution. And it's a very individual effort. What are going to be the challenges? How do we reinforce that? What are we asking them to do differently? And how do we prepare them for this solution coming on board? There's also that individuality of resistance, helping individuals understand managers and organizations and leaders can only do so much to prepare the organization. We've got to teach those individuals to manage that resistance themselves. And we have to identify that early. What are going to be the challenges with this adoption? And then the structure of change, really having this approach that prepares this from the beginning of the development throughout the development and then throughout that implementation. It doesn't just start at implementation. If you wait until that point, you've missed 2/3 of the opportunity to develop and embed this effort throughout. So having that preventative, proactive, responsive model is how we are getting in front of the change and making sure that we're creating something that is ultimately going to stick.
Awesome. Thanks, Cheryl. So as we look at this, let's talk a little bit about how this would work together. So when we initiate an effort, defining the vision and identifying the intent, that can be a common activity. That is your change team, that is your program and project team, and bringing that leadership group together to say, this is where we're going. And at that same time, thinking a little bit about the end and starting to really appreciate those people who will be adopting the new ways of working, that's the goal. So it starts there. We really need to start thinking about those people who have to adopt the new ways of working, even before we build the new ways of working. So we start understanding that, we identify those people as stakeholders, and as well as other stakeholders to the effort, right? There's people for an effort, a program or project, there are business results. This is an investment, right? So when making an investment, I'm expecting a business return. So that's what we're preparing for, as we initiate and plan. And in order for us to be successful, we have to do both things together in the planning phase, in the initiate phase, way up front. And then we start talking about building an adoptable solution. There's a million ways, different approaches out there, all dependent on what you're building and what your solution is going to be. So pick the right tool, pick the right approach for the solution you're building, right? And then as that's progressing, start using your preventative change approach, remove unintended and unnecessary resistance from the solution. For example, recent effort on a recent client we're working with, they were implementing, people weren't required to build very detailed project plans. And the solution was they wanted visibility to the workflow on a portfolio of roughly 200, 300 projects that were in flight at any given time. And they just didn't really know what was going on with that. And so to do that, the solution was going to build in schedule. And we had a lot of clear conversations and understood the resistance points from the end user while we were building the solution, so we could prevent the best as possible that transition. Imagine from going autonomy of like, yeah, I know when I'm going to end and here's what my end date looks like, to no, we need to understand what that journey looks like. And so very thoughtfully built a solution that prevented and removed some of those resistance points, and it increased adoption. Now, was it smooth? Of course not, because it was a very rough change for this group, but we were better than we would have been had we just ignored it. And so as we're doing that, we're proactively anticipating and planning those and overcoming them, and we're preparing. Our change team began to prepare for that. And awareness started when we were building the solution. Everyone knew we were building this solution and this change was coming. Everybody talks. So awareness doesn't start when the solution's built. Awareness starts when the solution's being built, because people are talking. So we started the awareness campaign, if you will, while the solution was being built. And then as we progress, proactively making the right adjustments, collecting feedback. We piloted, measured, got feedback of our solution before we transitioned into going live. Now, as we went into that, right now, people are truly becoming aware of the new way of working. They've heard some stuff. Now this is the real new way of working. And we're taking them through that journey. And so as we're adopting that new solution and we're bringing those new ways of working to life, we're collecting feedback. And as appropriate, we will iterate on the solution. The solution doesn't have to be set in stone during the release point, which some people think of. It's gone, it's out, and we're done. Well, no, we need to hear from the end users, and we really need to appreciate that feedback loop and allow leadership to either tweak the solution or the way they're supporting people as they move through their journey. And we make those decisions, right? So we're partnering with change to say, hey, is this something where are we going to change the solution? Or do we need to enable our leadership team to do a better job or a different job of really helping the team move up through a commitment to adoption? And we work those and we make the minor adjustments or whichever way we go. And ultimately, right, any of these large efforts, you get to adoption achieved. And the goal is now this is business as usual. The new way of working is implemented. People have adopted it and it's running this way now. Right. And that's not a smooth transition. For those of you who do this all the time, every day, that journey is not, it's not a linear straight line as much as we like to draw it that way. But by doing this together, we've seen the idea of building a quality adoptable solution. We're seeing tremendous benefit when we get to the point where the new ways of working are being brought to life. And that's what we're sharing today. So Cheryl, anything to add there?
I do. And, as a change management practitioner, we often talk so much about how important stakeholder engagement, sponsor alignment, leadership alignment, all of those different elements are at the very beginning. And when we're not able to get with leaders at the very beginning to begin to have those conversations so that we know what they're thinking when they're talking about the solution and why that solution is so important, then we miss out on some very valuable information that's going to support that messaging throughout. The other challenge with that is that leaders start to see this as two separate functions, two separate activities. And they feel like, hey, why are you pulling on me twice? And so putting those elements together, and that's just one example throughout this entirety, is when we're talking intent, we're talking around the vision for the product and then what that looks like within the organization. And oftentimes PMs will have those conversations, and that's good. That's what we want to see. And that's a great way to start incorporating it in there. If the change manager's not involved or that PM's not continuing it through adoption, that valuable information is lost or has to get double dipped when we have to circle back. And then it's like, change is always coming after me for more information. And as the change person, I take that very personally. I'm like, it didn't have to be double. And so a great way to save them some time, energy, and frustration, and get in early and have that consistent flow. Leadership involvement is so important. And so we want to get these messages out to them early that this is not two different things. It is one thing, and we'll save you time whenever we can.
So what can we do? Let's think about some key considerations. Where do your program, project, and change managers sit? So for example, Cheryl and I are on the same team, right? And our teams work very closely together. As far as are they teams robust across the organization, that's another key consideration. And do they follow specific methodology or framework? One of the things that we're able to do, for example, I'll just pick both change management and program and project management have stakeholder management. And they have stakeholder analysis. How can they come together? So it's not feeling duplicative to those other members of the program and project team. There's a way for us to do that. That's one example. Some actions that we could take. Assess the readiness and openness of the organization, right? do they want to do this? Is this something that you've had some experience where it's like, ooh, maybe it is beneficial for us to all come together? And yeah, we had something where it was disjointed and we saw those problems we talked about earlier. Maybe there is value in us coming together. And in doing so, then sharing those ideas, right? So one example, again, was the stakeholder analysis and how we manage our stakeholders. Again, making sure we understand, this is a good one here. Cheryl and I have to be really clear on what are the guardrails. Where does change in and PM begin? And we're very thoughtful about that. And the easiest way to do it is just be candid and talk about it, right? Just be transparent and talk. And it helps a ton.
Yeah. And
right?
just want to touch on that guardrail, Bill, before you move on to the next one. I forget. We're talking about throughout the process, not those bimodal graph again at beginning and ends, but who's collecting this information, and am I pushing too far and starting to dig into something technical that I have no business being in? Or when, how do we manage that relationship as it goes through the project, not as an up and down?
Yeah. And Cheryl, I'll let you bring us home. I know you like this last one. I'll let you bring us home.
All right. Just be patient, and it's okay to start slow. And I really highlighted this one because so many times we say, gosh, we have a PMO and a CMO. How do we begin to incorporate those? And it's too much. It's too big of an elephant to even begin to think about. And, as that's why I commented on the poll when I said we don't really have much of a practice at all. That might be the cleanest slate and the best way to go, because you can start working with the individuals who are doing that and say, just upskill a little bit on the change piece or the project management piece. There's so much more that you could get to be effective in your role. And that change communication might be easier than it is to when you have two very strong organizations that you're trying to mesh. We're doing just fine, thank you. We don't necessarily need to mess any of this up. And then as we begin to incorporate within the organization, they start to have a pull. And they say, gosh, that really worked well. It was smooth. It was faster. We were better on time and on budget than any other project. And our organization really latched on to it. There was energy around it. We want more of that. Okay, well, now we have this pool and we can start to have these conversations. But we talk about these considerations because all of these are going to impact how quickly and easily you're able to do these implementations, how you're going to have these conversations. If you have two very firm frameworks, that could be easier because now you have very firm frameworks to align, or it can be harder because they're more stuck in their ways. And it's better to not have any at all. It's really dependent on your culture and your organization and who you're working with. So I encourage you to not get frustrated, but just start having these conversations and see if it's something that would be appropriate for your organization. Like I'm working with Bill. How do we do this? How do we make it work? Practice it, try it out. Maybe there is a ramp up and ramp down at first while you're figuring out all these details, and just know it's not going to be pain free at first. You might step on each other's toes. You might forget to invite someone to a meeting and have to share information. And that's all part of the process, and it's okay. But it is valuable to start working with your leadership and your teams to say, does this make sense for us? Do we have anything in the chat, Kim? Anything that's been raised or any questions?
I do have some questions that came through the Q&A function. Also, just double check your chats and see if anybody direct messaged you a question, just to make sure we don't miss anything. So while you're doing that, I am going to ask you, there's a question, I have a couple questions that came through. So let's start with, what if you don't have funding or leadership support to incorporate PM and CM? Anybody?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so if we have a funding challenge, right? So I think for me, at least, this has come up, the approach that I took that was successful was, it's a little bit of pay me now or pay me later. And so in order for we can expedite and accelerate the rate of adoption is what we talked about by bringing us together now. And that was the conversation, and where that went, it was about that, right? That if we bring them together up front, we can accelerate the rate of adoption. And then from there, the conversation just went naturally into, great, now tell me how that happens. And if you go back to what we were talking about earlier, when we bring change in up front, there is a journey to go on. And as Cheryl said, in this case, there was a bit of a ramp up and a ramp down to be mindful of dollars. And that was agreed to in our approach. That's a great question. And that's how I've approached it. Cheryl?
Yeah, this is to your point where you start having conversations, and oftentimes there is ample justification for project management. How else are we supposed to get these solutions developed? Everyone needs a project manager to really support that, and organizations can understand that. Change management often feels like something we can incorporate, which you can, but they often don't. Or we have someone that does that. Our HR team does that. And so what I would do, and what we've worked with our clients to do, is to upskill those project managers and those leaders going through change, and say, if you're not going to bring someone in, if you don't really have the funding to do that, here's a quick course on how to do this better. Questions that you can ask that are so valuable to your effort, that are going to make your effort better. Things that you can start thinking of, because you can integrate those into conversations you're already having. Just ask one more question, ask it a different way, tweak the way that you're approaching it now, and you'll get two pieces of information instead of one. And that is all relatively inexpensive. And if it's your area, if you are the HR person who knows something about change, it might even be free, because you're having one-on-one conversations with them. Here's a quick tool, here's a conversation, just kind of implement this a little bit while you're working up that support and then starting to receive that pull. But it can be challenging. You can't go all in if you don't have large scale support and some funding to do that.
Great. Perfect. Here's a question. Have you ever built a solution you thought was amazing, but ran into resistance during the implementation?
Oh, of course, all the time.
Every single one.
Yeah, I mean, it's very common. Again, this is the whole point that maybe was helpful for us to realize we need to bring in change earlier, was that initially we're building this solution in the program management, the project, and we're thinking about how are we driving to get to that business result. And it's not all, and you always bring all the smart people together, and all the smart people start building this awesome solution. And sometimes they forget how well or not it would be adopted in the organization. And so, of course, that happens all the time, which is, again, one of the main reasons why we're here saying, let's bring change up front so that we're thinking about adoption while we're building the solution. It might be, hey, that's the greatest new way of working or greatest feature or function you're going to put in a tool. No one's going to use it. And here's why. So we have to have a different conversation around that. And maybe it's an evolution, right? I've done that before, where we've said, hey, great stuff. This is the end goal. Now let's talk about, work with our change partners and talk about the journey we have to take people on. This is that you're probably 3 or 4 steps ahead of us, SME, who's helping us build a solution. We have to break this up in incremental steps that allows people to go on that journey towards adoption. At least that's how I've approached it in the past. It happens all the time on projects, right? You build this thing, you're like, this is the best thing ever, and then it's, ooh, okay, a lot of resistance here, and you put a lot of pressure on the adoption side of things when you do that. But Cheryl, I welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. It's not just about the employees either. I was working on an implementation of a brand merger, and the challenge was that in that area, the customers were very connected to the previous brand, and you did not give enough credit to how impactful that was going to be for the customers. Hey, it's the same business, it's the same many things, but they didn't dig into what the customers in that area, in that region, really liked about the previous brand and the previous owners. And so through the change management process, we would have dug into each of the targets, not just the ones directly impacted by who's having to do something different within the organization, but also how it impact throughout the organization as well. And as we were getting closer to implementation, we started to dig into that, and it said, wow, these customers needed a lot more time to get on board. They were going for a big launch of a community event that was happening, and they were going to launch it then, not realizing that was not going to go so well, because those customers were like, I don't know you. I'm used to calling my friend who sits on the board now, and she got my car right through and got it addressed. And so we really had to take a step back and say, gosh, this is a great plan and a great product you put together of this new branding material. But it's not really going to do what we need to do from an external perspective. Created some significant challenges for that implementation and ultimately had to be pushed back so we could do it correctly.
Great. Anything else to add? No? Okay.
On that one.
I have one final question, and I don't know if you touched on it or not, but I'm going to ask it. Does this work if you have a PMO and CMO?
Sure. Why don't you start?
Yeah, so that's where I was kind of jumping in on these two strong organizations. If typically, in my experience, PMOs operate with their tools and their teams and their processes, and CMOs, which might be a little more rare, don't have any stats on that, but they also have their process and their teams and how they operate. And they don't necessarily work together. That's the more obvious handoff, or they have one and not the other. But this is where you really have to have leader buy-in, involvement, and practice what we preach here around change management, and say, how do we get both teams on board? And what's great is if the PM team is pulling that and saying, we want to do this more cohesively, but you have some extra sandboxes that can make it really tough. You've got some of those challenges with, this is the area that I play in, and I really don't want you taking any of that away from me. How is it going to impact me and my organization and my team? Are we going to like have one person now instead of two? What does that actually look like, especially for those smaller projects that don't necessarily have the funding for two people to be on that? And so it just takes a little bit more time, I would say, and more effort to really map that out and align it and say, what are those guardrails of where each of us play? And is it necessary to have both, or can we upskill one or the other, especially for those smaller efforts? But I would say it can be a little bit more challenging, even though it sounds great. You've got these two great teams and resources, but getting those aligned can be just an effort in change management for sure, and stakeholder alignment.
Yeah, I agree with all of those points, Cheryl. And to build on it, the big step is just like Cheryl and I, it's, do you want to work together? So for us, we want to work together. And so the fact that we have, both of us have very formal structures. And for us, it helped. For example, right, when there are many approaches to define a vision. There are many. And we had one in our PM practice. But change has an approach that identifies the intent, right? We said, all good. We'll use the change approach to identifying the intent of the effort, and we use that approach now. So we started finding common ways where, yeah, we can use that. We don't have to have these visioning tools. We can use that one, and those are ways we could do it. Also about, again, when we dig into, hey, you have this stakeholder management, you have this stakeholder analysis work. Well, so do I. What is that? Yeah. And just asking each other questions on what we do. For example, on my side in the PM space, a lot of our stakeholders are about the people who are driving those business results and the people we need to build a solution. That's a lot of what we focus on. And we need to make sure we have people who are supportive of the effort. And there's always negative people within the organization that want a different approach, want something different. Well, we're managing that, right? Mm-hmm. And then Cheryl was like, well, we want to talk about whoever we're going to roll this solution out to. Who is that? What's that look like for them? What's that going to feel like for them as individuals? What are the leaders going to do? And all of those pieces. And we said, oh, great, we could totally bring these together. It was very easy for us once we unpacked what we were actually doing. They weren't the same. They were actually quite different. And it worked out quite well. So there's a way to kind of chip, if you have that structure, which was helpful for us, we kind of just chipped away at them. Like, hell, help me understand this, help me understand that, help me understand this. And it was just really a conversation that was, let me seek to understand before I seek to be understood. And it allowed for a lot of positive dialogue that allowed us to start stitching this together in a way that works really well for us. So
I like that.
I'm looking at the time, and also I don't see any other questions coming through. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, especially our presenters. It was a great discussion, and a big thank you to everybody joining us for your time and attention as well. At the end of the session, I do ask if you take a minute just to fill out our survey. We love to hear your feedback, and we take it very seriously. We hope you'll join us again for another one of our upcoming webinars. Visit GP Strategy's website to see future sessions, and I wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks, everyone.
This webinar was brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we help organizations transform through their people. You can access more webinars or download additional resources by visiting the GP Strategies Resource Library. The link is on your screen and in the description.